I'm Sky Foerster. My day job is that I teach in the political science department at the Air Force Academy, but I have the distinct pleasure and honor of being the president of the Colorado Springs World Affairs Council. And this is a different kind of program for us. We're quite excited about it. As you may remember from the flyer, we are, as a council, a member of, along with 93 other councils across the country, and we often don't think about being part of a national network, although we are autonomous. We're part of a national network that was leadership of which was surveyed early in 2011. What are the top national security challenges facing the United States? And the usual suspects, Iraq, Afghanistan, China, the Middle East, and so on. Economic competitiveness, as Admiral Mullen made clear before he retired. But the number one, by far, the number one national security challenge facing this country, according to World Affairs Councils across the country, is education. Can we compete in the 21st century with our educational system? And so I thought, well, what better to do amongst all the Christmas parties and pageants and plays and everything else and final exams, what better to do than to convene the leadership of this city's really prominent and excellent institutions of higher education to talk about this panel. And we're thrilled that we have this panel in front of us tonight. To my far right, and there's no particular protocol or anything here, to my far right is Dr. Pamela Shockley-Zalabak, who is Chancellor and Professor of Communication at the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs. She is, there are not many university chancellors or CEOs who actually get to teach at the same time, and she does, and we should recognize that. She's also the author of 8 books and more than 100 articles and productions on organizational communication. Previously, she was Vice Chancellor for Student Success and the founding chair of the UCCS Communication Department. So please join me in welcoming and thanking Chancellor Shockley for coming and being part of our program. To my immediate right, I think most people in this room probably know and certainly recognize by the uniform, Lieutenant General Mike Gould is the Superintendent at the Air Force Academy, which in the world of higher education is the equivalent of a university president. And once upon a time when he was a cadet at the Academy, he never thought he would grow up to be a university president. But I can tell you he is a wonderful one. He is a graduate of the Air Force Academy in the class of 1976. Much younger than I, with a bachelor's degree in behavioral science. He's had a number of command positions in the United States and overseas. He was commander of the Cheyenne Mountain Operations Center down the road once upon a time. He spent 3 tours in the Pentagon, and that deserves a round of applause in and of itself. As well as a very special position as Air Force aide to the President and military assistant to the Secretary of the Air Force. Please join me in welcoming General Mike Gould. To my left is our hostess, if I can say that, Jill Tiefenthaler, the president of Colorado College for how many months? 5. 5 months, but who's counting? Came here from Wake Forest, is where she was provost and professor of economics, and before that taught economics at Colgate University and chaired the economics department there. She comes with a distinguished resume, and we're thrilled to have her in the community, and thrilled again that you were able to join us as well tonight, fresh from a school pageant, right? Please join me in welcoming Jill Tiefenthaler. And we have within this community Colorado Technical University, or a branch of CTU within the state of Colorado, which is really a national organization, at least the CEOs in Chicago. And Bentley Rayburn, who's the local CEO, got called to Chicago tonight. But we're delighted to have with us Dr. Bruce Harmon, who is professor of engineering, and he is dean of the School of Engineering and Computer Science and Information Technology at CTU here in Colorado Springs. And has just been promoted, if I can use that word. I don't know if you think it was a promotion, but he is the interim provost and stepping into some very important shoes at a very critical time in CTU's life. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Bruce Harmon. I just want to set the stage with a couple of comments, because we often don't think about the importance of education as it connects to our ability to compete in the world. You've heard some of these statistics before. The Broad Foundation, which focuses on K through 12 education, puts them quite starkly. We are losing a generation of American minds. American students rank 25th in math, 21st in science, compared to students out of 30 industrialized countries. By the end of 8th grade, U.S. students are 2 years behind in math being studied by their peers in other countries. 68% of 8th graders cannot read at the 8th grade level, and most will never catch up. More than 1.2 million students drop out of school every year, and that's a huge cost to the rest of us because of what happens in the rest of their lives. Our national high school graduation rate is 70%, but for African American and Latino students, on-time graduation is less than half. And for all of that, we pay over $11,000 per pupil in K through 12 education, which is the highest in the industrialized world. But I have higher education leaders here. So we're not going to focus on K through 12, but in a sense they deal with, that set of problems and issues is what sends the freshman classes to these institutions. But that problem continues. 50% of all students studying for an associate degree and 20% of students seeking a bachelor's degree need remedial or development courses just to bring them up to a baseline. And a Pew survey earlier this year of over 1,000 college presidents in this country showed that over 1/3 of college presidents in the U.S. believe that their industry is heading in the wrong direction. That same survey of 2,100 Americans from the Pew Service said 75% of Americans believe that college was out of reach for most people, although enrollments are up, but so is unemployment. I'm not going to go on with more statistics, but I wanted to set the stage of an issue that isn't just important because we love education and because the World Affairs Council is an educational organization, but because the consequences of this issue, what many have called equally a crisis in higher education, just as in K through 12, is something that really affects our ability to compete in this world. One final quotation. I happen to be a fan of Tom Friedman, and it was about 2 months ago that and if you read him, he's been writing a lot about the challenges of a hyper-connected world. It is more vital than ever that we have schools elevating and inspiring more of our young people to become better and best, because good won't cut it anymore, and average is definitely over. So that's the competitive edge that we want to try and get a little bit at tonight. The way we're going to do this tonight is, good news for you, I'm not going to say much more. I'm going to pose questions to our panelists. Most of them are general, and I'll invite each to make whatever remarks they wish to make on that. I don't imagine any fistfights. I suspect there will be lots of agreement. But we do have 4 different perspectives here, which I think makes this panel particularly interesting. We have the Chancellor of a part of the state university system. We have the Superintendent of a national military academy, a service academy. We have the President of a liberal arts college. And we have the interim provost from a for-profit college that focuses more on occupational skills. And so we have different missions here, different parts of the higher education slice. So I'm going to ask them to offer their perspective on some questions that I'm going to ask. And at about 7 o'clock or so, I'm going to open it up for questions from you. And hopefully we can just have a much more interactive evening. So with that, let's proceed. And let me start with you, Pam, and just ask you, and we'll just run down the table. How do each of you see the role of education in maintaining America's global competitiveness. And, you know, I invite you to deal with that from your own perspective of your own institution or education, higher education particularly in general.
All right, thank you. And thank you for having this panel tonight, because I do believe that this is one of the issues that we must come front and center with if we are going to be competitive or collaboratively globally. And one of the things I would say is, of course, and you would expect me to say, and it's not profound, that I believe that education is the core to global competitiveness. But it is also the core to being able to collaborate globally, which is a form of securing the competitiveness of the future. So I think from a broad sense, this is the human capital century in every respect. It is about inclusiveness, resilience, innovation, and the science of learning. And when I think about what role education plays, it's all of that. For the particular institution, UCCS, I think very much about the fact that we have, because of where we are located in Colorado, which is the least educated half of the state of Colorado, with 12 percentage points less post-secondary education participation of any type than Castle Rock North, we specialize in helping first-generation, low-income students become educated and therefore contribute to competitiveness. And so that's an exciting responsibility. It's a difficult challenge, certainly, but it's something that I feel is the core of competitiveness today, is not always focusing on the traditional populations that have gone to universities throughout our history, but it is realizing that because of the demography of the United States in particular, but it's also the world, that we have got to reach into populations, whether it be four-year degrees, technical training, particular type of expertise that we have not previously focused on, and I think that's key.
Well, thanks, Pam. And Sky, let me say thanks to you as well, and to all of you for coming out tonight. You obviously place some value on education because you're here to learn a little bit tonight. Not that we're going to enlighten you so much, but you'll develop your own thoughts on this vital issue. As you read through your intro and the questions that you've posed, I thought back to an interview I had once when I was a major in the Air Force, and I went in to interview at the White House to, like Sky said, I served as the aide to the president for a little while, President Bush, 41. And the question they posed was, what's the biggest issue facing our country today? And I said, education. And this was in when was it? It was 25 years ago. And the follow-on, of course, is why? Why do you think that's important? And I think it's evident. If we cannot continue to compete as a nation and develop young men and women to go up and take our places, then we have failed them, and they'll fail us. I'm an optimist on this. I think that our children, the statistics that Sky went through might say one thing, but what I think we see is that kids today are learning in a different way, at a different pace than we may have. And if anything, I think maybe our measurements are off a little bit. And I tell you this because we struggle with admissions at the Air Force Academy to go out and find the brightest, the most well-rounded, the young people who show leadership traits. And standardized test scores don't always tell the story. And grade point averages can be influenced and manipulated depending on the school system and other things. But what we see are some really, really talented young people who are eager to learn, not just in a formal setting like we may have grown up in, but through experiences. And that's what excites me. I don't think the problem is as great as we may see through statistics, but it's up to us in higher education to make sure we develop those talents that are out there and prepare this generation to go out and lead. And I'm confident they'll do that, and they'll take our country on to even greater heights.
Great, thank you. I just want to add my welcome and say how lovely it is to see such a great representation from across the community here at Colorado College with us tonight. I'm going to answer this question of the importance of education at this point in American history from both the viewpoint of an educator and an economist. As Sky mentioned, that's my discipline. In the last 30 years, the American worker has experienced something different than they had in the previous part of the 20th century. In the last 30 years, real wages for American workers have actually declined. And if you break that down, that data down, you'll find something pretty interesting. And that is that in that group, and by real wages, I mean wages adjusted for inflation. And if you look over that time period, what you'll find is from that time period, only college-educated workers saw their wages increase in real terms. Those with high school degrees saw their wages stagnate, and those who were high school dropouts actually saw their real wages decline during that 30 years. And this phenomenon has led to a lot of things, including the increase in income inequality that we've seen in the United States over that time period, as well as, I would argue, the difference in unemployment rates that we're seeing right now. While our unemployment rates come down a little bit recently, that's one of the top topics on the news right now. But if you break down the unemployment rate, which is around 8.6% right now, you actually find that college-educated workers are about 4.2%, below what economists like to call full employment, whereas those with high school degrees are way over 9%, and those that haven't finished high schools are over 14%. So as you look at those statistics, I think they also feed into some of the frustration we've seen in the Occupy Wall Street movements across the country with those issues of growing income inequality. Why has this happened, I think, is a really interesting question. And economists come up with two big reasons. One, they talk about trade and the flat world and everything Tom Friedman will talk about in his column. And that is more and more of our jobs for those who have specific skills but not a lot of education have gone overseas in recent years with the flat world and the increase in trade. But in addition to that, the improvements in technology have meant that the returns to educated workers, those with more skills in education, have increased at the same time that the demand for workers without education has declined. So if you look at that whole picture, we had an Occupy Wall Street panel on campus with the students about a month ago, and if you look at that whole picture and put it together, I think it says quite clearly why we need to focus on education. And that is that the future of jobs in this country, where our folks are going to be able to do middle class, lead middle class lifestyles that we've enjoyed throughout most of the 20th century, is going to require more education. I had the privilege of talking to a group of LPMR students who were on for the LPMR readiness program from our 3 poorest school districts who were on campus yesterday. And I told them to close their eyes and imagine their favorite job that they might have when they graduated from college, and then to open their eyes and think about what they needed to do to get there. And almost all of those jobs are going to require a college degree in this day and age. So I'd say when the students ask about the solution to our problems right now, I think education is the number one. And I would say that's, as an educator, very broadly defined in terms of improved K through 12, increase in high school graduation rates, and something in higher ed we have to really work on hard, which is what Pam mentioned earlier, is access to higher education in the very rich and broad system of higher education that we have in this country. Thanks.
Thank you. And I did want to convey from Colorado Tech Bentley Rayburn's regrets. He had to be called away to Chicago, as was mentioned earlier, so I'm very, very pleased to represent him and our school here today. My perspective will be a little bit more along technical lines, that is the kinds of jobs that people are able to get in computer science, engineering, and IT. And I think the United States can be very proud of its record of higher education. If we take a look across the globe and ask where do people from foreign nations want to attend in order to get the best higher education degree that they can, they will choose the United States more than any other country in the world. We can be proud of the fact that the English language, not proud, but anyway, we can certainly leverage the fact that the English language gives us something of an advantage, and the UK places number 2. But nonetheless, our education system here at least the undergraduate and graduate level is really the best in the world. We should be very proud of that. It gives us an opportunity to further extend our lead in the world in terms of education. But we face some threats, and those threats really are what kind of students arrive for higher education, and often they are somewhat challenged compared to years past. There's opportunity for that to be better. I think higher education appreciates that it can be better. I do want to talk a little bit about what the opportunities are and why the United States is a great place for this kind of work. For one, the people working in computer security, the threats come from all over the world, but among the world's leaders in defending against cyber threats, the United States is in the lead. And there are lots of opportunities for people in Colorado Springs in particular because of the focus here on that field. So I want to say that opportunities also in this field include major changes in this field, that is clouds nowadays, and I don't mean those little fuzzy things in the sky, but I mean when you may have heard that many suppliers of software now supply their software by way of massive data centers, and these clouds then are really the way of the future. We can see that coming. Mobility. Most of you here, I'm sure if I ask you to pull out, would show a cell phone of one sort or another, and you are connected to the world by way of this little mobile device. And these are really some opportunities for the United States where I think most of this inventive work really does happen. I've outsourced work in engineering to India, and I can tell you that nations like that aren't what they appear to be. That the really innovative nation in the world is this country. We have a lot to be proud of, and I'm very optimistic that we'll be able to sustain that lead, in part because foreign students will come here, and then they will take that stuff, that information and that skill back. But as much as anything, it helps sustain the United States' reputation as the best country in the world for this field. So.
Thank you. And Bruce, I'm going to pass the microphone back to you because you raised an issue about the challenges. I think you said the challenges or the threats, so what kind of students arrive. Could you say a little bit more, and then I'll ask each of you to comment. And again, each of you is drawing a different cohort of students. But generally speaking, are they prepared for college intellectually? Are they prepared for college emotionally? What do you worry about? What do you like? You can take any piece of that you like.
Well, thank you. I think there's good news and there's bad news. There are many very bright students, and this still is the best country in the world in terms of opportunity to figure out how can I make a contribution in these fields. But by the same token, there are many high school students who just don't want to be bothered with learning the math that it takes to be really good and to make the kind of contribution and to be all that they can be. So that's the other side of it too. There's a national program called STEM, Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics, that addresses this and tries to support high school teachers and students that want to grow in this area. But the fact is that they're not as well prepared as we'd like them to be. You cited the statistics guy that we're 25th or 21st, depending on which category you take a look at in mathematics and science. There's no excuse for the United States to be that poor performing coming in. There are remedial classes, and we have the opportunity to help them grow to where they need to be. But as a nation, at the primary school and at the high school level, we need to do better.
Colorado College is a highly selective institution, and so we have a little bit of a different population. But I think about this generation of students and the different strengths that they bring to the table. Often, the millennials, as they're often called, this generation that's coming to us now, really do bring a lot of wonderful new skills to the table that make me very excited about the future of our country. They're amazingly collaborative, the most collaborative generation of students I've ever taught. They're very innovative. because of the uses and options in technology. If they don't like something, they sort of just go around, very respectfully usually. They also love adults, this generation. They're close to their parents, and they enjoy adults and mentoring and working with adults, which is a great characteristic to bring them into the workplace and nurture them and mentor them, which I think is fantastic. And they're also they're very socially and service conscious, the most so of any generation that I've taught since I've been in higher ed. And not only do they want to get involved, but if they see a problem and they don't see a solution, they'll start a nonprofit. I mean, in college students, high school students, and below, they are very put that innovation, that technology, and that service orientation together to make a difference in the world. On the other side, we do see some challenges with this generation of students coming, as Sky mentioned, mostly on that emotional front. And the same group of students who have benefited from loving their parents and being close to them and loving adults have also have grown up with some sense of entitlement. Fewer children in a family. Very few of the students that come to us have ever shared a room when they come to college, which is quite a change from when we went to college. And many of us in higher education really do worry about their resilience. This is a generation who everybody got a medal and everybody won, and everybody's above average. It's really Lake Woebegone. And we do worry about them picking themselves back up when things are tough. We've also seen nationally in the last 2 decades an increase in the number of students who come to us with needing psychological support. Those numbers have grown astronomically in the last decades on college campuses. There's lots of explanations for that. I won't get into them now because it'll take me a little while. But that's been a really big phenomenon of this generation of students that have come to us. So that's added some new complications, and I think adds new complications for the workforce when they leave education, both in terms of that resilience thing, and we think about that a lot. How do we do a better job of helping to build that resilience through the college experience? But overall, I would say I'm incredibly, as the General was indicating, inspired by this generation of leaders. So we have a lot of troubles, but I'm really confident that they're the generation to tackle them.
Let me just tag one piece onto this. Do you recruit from particular demographics since you have the opportunity to be selected?
We don't recruit. We recruit very broadly, nationally and internationally, and try to get the very best students and mix of students that we can. I always tell folks, especially parents who get concerned about admission, that we are really trying to build a class, not just a collection of individuals. So we try to put together folks from across the country, across the world, folks from different backgrounds, from both socioeconomic, racial, ethnic parts of the country experiences, so that with a residential liberal arts college, when everybody's together 24/7, the benefits of having different points of view in the classroom and in the dorm room and in the dining hall are really significant. So the more diverse and varied we can make our population, the richer we find the experience to be at a place like this.
You bet.
And if you could talk also to the business of recruitment, because I
Right.
know you do focus on it.
We sure do, and the question goes back to what Sky asked, are these students today intellectually and emotionally prepared? And you see all extremes, and our admission standards are such that on paper at least they must be intellectually prepared. But what we find sometimes are some of the kids who have the highest scores, the predictors of success academically, don't necessarily do that well if they aren't emotionally prepared for the rigors of our particular curriculum, which is different, of course, than my counterparts up here. So we'll see some, and their grades and their conduct and other things just won't really match what we saw on paper when we admitted them. And we have to scratch our heads and say, where did we miss? And it's on us. It's on the faculty, the staff, the coaches, and everybody else who makes up our team out at the academy. So whenever we find a student who's not doing well, it's back to, what are we doing wrong? But what we find is if you can get that combination of they have the intellect and we can get them emotionally adjusted to the rigors of our program, they do phenomenal work. We had a neat story about it. It's about, again, the experiences and the innovation that these young people come up with. We had a cadet And a big part of their education at the academy is summer travel, where we send them abroad to go out and operate among Air Force members around the world. We had a young guy who was over in Qatar at Al Udeid Air Base, as a matter of fact, this past summer, and he had 3 weeks there. 1 week he was going to spend in the in the operations center, just learning how the air war goes together. The next week he was going to spend, and he did spend, out with the civil engineers who were taking care of problems around the base. And the third week he was down on the flight line helping to launch jets who were, taking off and dropping bombs. Well, he's in his third week, and they've got an airplane out there, a B-1 bomber, and the maintainers tell this young cadet that, well, this airplane is broken. It's going to take about a month to fix it because we need a certain type of foam to be installed around this rocket motor in the ejection seat. And that might not mean anything to you, but the issue was it was a technical problem that nobody could seem to fix. Well, the cadet said, last week I was over working with the civil engineers, and they had this can of spray foam that they were using to, for a plumbing problem or something in one of the dormitories. I'll bet you I could get this foam and come over here and help you fix the jet. Well, they kind of shake their head and they say, no, you don't understand, young man. He disappeared for an hour, came back with this can of foam, and came up with a solution to make this jet mission capable in an hour instead of a month to send it back to the States to get fixed. It's the innovation and the ability to just say, hey, we can figure this out. And again, that's why I'm optimistic. This guy was a fairly average cadet as far as things might go. But he solved a key problem, and that's emotional preparedness, it's intellectual, and it's just a way of getting things done.
Well, much of what has been said, I would also say about the students that I encounter. We recruit broadly, very broadly in Colorado. We recruit selectively out of state. And we have, and largely because of the military population in our community, we have 40 foreign countries represented, although we do not recruit internationally the way many institutions do. One of the things that we see in our student body is an increasingly, on paper, prepared student. We have an admissions index in the public sector that ours is in what is called the second tier in Colorado. Colorado School of Mines is number 1, Boulder is number 2, and then we, along with CSU, Fort Collins, and UNC, we're in what is called that second tier. But the reality is 87% of everyone who comes to UCCS qualifies to go to Boulder or to Mines. But they're choosing a smaller environment for a variety of reasons. And what we find is 85% of our students, and these are highly qualified students. They could go to Mines or Boulder or Colorado College or the Academy in some cases, or Colorado or CTU for sure, all of those. But what we're finding is they also are coming without a preparation of how much it is going to take to really excel at their academic work, because 85% of them work 30 hours or more a week while going to school. Now, are they intellectually capable? You bet they are. But are they really prepared for this complex environment of where 42% of our students are their own sole support? And it does not mean they don't have supportive families. They don't have families who can afford to contribute to their education. So for us, it's very complex in helping them be emotionally, and this is a tough week because we're going into finals week, with students who are also working and taking finals and the pressures of the holidays. So we find that balance of not prepared emotionally, mostly, for the challenges and rigor of putting all of this together. Extremely highly motivated. And the one thing that is so remarkable about this group of young people is how service-oriented they are. I was meeting with our senior seminar faculty in engineering just a week ago. The senior projects, all of the students get to choose a project in industry, a social service project. They're all technical design projects. But the reality is 90% of the senior class chose working with nonprofits in this community to provide a technical solution. We don't force that at all. They get to choose in their senior project. So I agree with you. Much more service-oriented, much more complex. And in that sense, their view of making a contribution to the future is absolutely critical. And our view of how to teach for a competitive future must change, particularly in the science and technology areas, so that we're showing what kind of a contribution you can make, as opposed to, here are all of the facts and figures that get you to the design project in your senior year. In other words, we have to start with design and end with design, and not necessarily go the way around. I'm encouraged by our students. I'm encouraged by the students that I see throughout the country. It's complex, because we're in a time of changing how we view higher education into more of a private good than a public good. And that diminishes our competitiveness. And for my type of students, that's extraordinarily challenging, because they're already working to put themselves through school. And as the price of tuition continues to increase, that becomes more problematic because of the new financial decisions that we're making and how that contributes to our competitiveness, but it contributes to individuals. When I think about recruiting, we have started, because of the low post-secondary participation rates in southern Colorado, we've started going into middle schools very, very regularly. And in fact, we have 23 middle schools who will be bringing student visitations to campus this year. And then we work with them and show the kinds of things that you want to do with, and sometimes it's even lower. We've had second graders. I'm not convinced that's going to work, but it's better than, you got to try. But I had the absolutely, it brought tears to my eyes actually, one of the most inspiring emails of my career last week. And it's a woman I'm going to meet with next week. She said, "Dear Chancellor Shockley, my son is going to come to your institution in 10 years. I am a single mom working 2 jobs. I did not go to college, but I've been told that you would meet with me and help me decide how I can afford it." Well, of course I'm going to meet with her. And it takes a village and a community for all of us to figure out how we're going to afford this. But the reality is, that's the kind of motivation that will change individual lives, but it will collectively make us more competitive. And so I'm so looking forward to meeting with this mom. She will actually help me more than I will help her, because she gives me hope for the future.
Wow, that's an interesting story. I'm wondering, could you say a little, you used a wonderful phrase there that I just want to make sure people can digest it, because I think there's a lot there that you just kind of went over. And I'm going to ask you to return to it. And that is that education is becoming less a public good and more a private good, and that this is impairing our competitiveness. And I think that's an interesting comment, and I'd ask you to just elaborate a little more on that.
And I actually think Jill probably could do this better than I, so I'll let her chime in. I am not the economist at the table. But the reality is, in the United States, we are making a shift over the last decade in the public education sector to really saying, we will not support at the levels that we have previously public access to higher education. And therefore, those who can afford it and pay for it will have more access, not in any kind of structural way, but just in terms of who can pay to go to school. The percentage of, in the public sector, the percentage of a college education that a family or an individual student, often in my case, pays for, has risen dramatically. Everyone says costs are out of control, when in fact, if you control in the public sector for the decrease in public funding for higher education, inflation, at UCCS over the last decade, we are about increasing at the rate of inflation. But that isn't what tuition looks like when you've been paying for it, because it's been shifting more. Today, well, it will be July 1, the amount of the UCCS budget, all funds budget, that comes from the state of Colorado will be 9%. That means that 91% comes from all other sources of funding, with tuition being the largest segment. But this is not just UCCS, this is nationally. It's a basic trend nationally. Colorado has had some more severe issues around that. That is at a time where I have been privileged to be doing some work in India and China in the last 3 years, at a time where there is an enormous push for public funding of new universities, higher education, so that we are in a world where the model that we generated is now the model of some of our most significant partners and competitors globally. And that creates a complex situation. So that's what I meant, and Jill probably could say that much better than I.
What I'm going to pass this to you in a little bit, but I want to get back to one piece that I know that before we totally get away from the issue of recruitment, because the Air Force Academy is a federal institution, is coming from all the states, and in a unique way, there is a responsibility to make sure that the Academy is pulling in a representative demographic from the country. Could you talk about how that works and how challenging that is? Or how successful?
Be glad. Well, fairly successful, but here's the way it works. We have 4,400 cadets at any one time are authorized by law. We right now at the Air Force Academy are drawing that down to 4,000 cadets. And that's an Air Force decision to reduce our overall end strength. But the way our admissions works, every candidate has to get a nomination from a congressman or senator. And if you look at the Congress of the United States, that amounts to about 535 members of Congress who will appoint or at least nominate somebody to an academy. So if we're going to bring in a class of 1,000 students, over half of them are coming from members of Congress. So every state in the union is represented right there. And then we have a couple prep schools that contribute members each year to the tune of about 200 at the Academy Prep School and 100 of others. So now we're up to between 800 and 900, and we only have a few more, a couple hundred nominations now to fill out the class. And when you talk about demographics, we have to make sure we have a football team that can beat Army and Navy. So we will we'll go out and try to shape the class with certain athletic backgrounds, with certain demographics with regard to race and culture and background. And so we end up with a very diverse class just because of the way the process works. In addition to that, we bring in, and Sammy here is one of them, we bring in about 60 international students at any one time. And these are cadets who are either on a semester exchange or some of them are there for 4 years. So we'll have between 50 and 60 internationals. And we try really hard to make our academy look like the America that we lead. And so diversity is important to us. But standards are extremely high. So it makes us work even harder to go out and find the talent and educate them about what the Air Force Academy offers and then recruit them. And we compete against everybody here at the table as well as the Ivy Leagues and Stanfords and MITs and the rest. So it's important to us because there is strength in diversity. We know that. And we work this extremely hard.
We're getting close to the point where I'm going to invite you all to provide some questions. But I want to turn briefly to a kind of an underlying question that's been hinted at a couple of times. There have been a couple of references to the importance of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. But the lady to my left did an op-ed piece in the Denver Post 4 weeks ago, which I'll let her speak to. But it is a debate that continues to run back and forth in this country, and that is the importance of preparing students for the job that they for which they might qualify upon graduation, and the importance of preparing the students for life, citizenship, or whatever else you want to call it, through liberal arts. And so I'm going to ask Bruce then to talk about it from his standpoint at CTU. But Joe?
Yeah, thanks. The article, if you hadn't seen it, was in response to the Governor Scott in Florida, who suggested that they shouldn't have liberal arts majors like anthropology in Florida, and state money should just go to the STEM fields. And my response was that that was somewhat short-sighted. I mean, I would argue, as Bruce mentioned earlier, I think it's critically important to recognize the strength of the higher education system in the United States. And one of the greatest strengths is its diversity. We are a beacon of the world in higher education because of the fact that we have seen it largely as a public good for many years. We believed in what economists call externalities of higher education. That means that when I'm educated, it not only benefits me in my career, but it benefits my community and the people around me because I'm a better citizen, I'm a better worker, I'm a better voter, I'm better in all those things. And because of that, both governments and philanthropists over time have been willing to invest in higher education so that those who haven't been able to pay have had access to higher ed, and that's helped both public and private institutions. But to that diversity of higher ed, I really think focusing so much on one area and putting our resources in that area is neglecting that one of our great strengths is the diversity of our education that we offer, and that the liberal arts, which was Governor Scott's target, is actually one of the important part of that diversity of higher education. Different students find their ways to their career in different ways, and we believe at CC that the nimble mind that you get from a liberal arts education and the liberal arts skills like critical thinking and writing and reading is one great avenue not only to a really successful career, but also a meaningful life and engaged citizenship, which is something that we value in this country. And one of those reasons that we've always kind of seen higher ed as a public good, not just a private good. But I'll let Bruce comment as well.
You might think that I'm going to argue with that, but I'm not at all. I think a liberal arts education is a wonderful thing, and I would encourage that for anybody. Our institution is really founded on a different premise, and that is that we're there to help people advance in their careers or to make that first job happen. Our population at Colorado Tech, average age is 36 years old. So these are people that have already been through school, they've been out there in industry, they've either worked or maybe not worked, and they want to find they want to make the next step in terms of career advancement. So what we're trying to do is a little bit different. In fact, we're held to a different standard than you are. Not to say that your standard isn't a great standard, but the standard that we're held to by the Department of Education and our accrediting body is career placement. So if we can't get 80% of our new graduates into jobs, our feet are held to the fire. And that's very, very challenging this year. I can tell you last year and for the 5 or 6 years before, we were very successful exceeding 80%. But this is a very, very tough environment now. Even college enrollments that were working in our favor as we went through the recession ends up being a little more difficult now, because what's happening is the people that entered the recession, didn't have a job, and decided to retool have already come. And so people that are ready to enter now, or let's say they're suffering in their jobs, they no longer have the money to participate in higher education. So it's a tough situation out there. I think where we have specialized is in preparing them for complex jobs in the technical fields.
Well, it's now your turn. Since we are being recorded for Pikes Peak Library District, I'm going to ask you to stand and give your question, and then I will repeat it so that it's being covered over the audio as well. And that'll give our panel at least a second to think about what they want to do. And we'll start here with David Watts in the front. You can even have the microphone and ask directly.
Thank you. It seems to me that there's an elephant in the room, and an elephant in the whole country. And that is that we start with this problem at the college level. and it begins much, much younger. We need to foster a country where from almost birth until 18 years of age, we need parents who are motivated, interested, intellectually stimulated, pass this on to their children. And with the diversions that are now possible, we've let this slip. And none of you have mentioned this problem, but it seems to me it's absolutely fundamental to how we deal with this subject.
Thank you, David. And we did start with some K through 12 statistics, but actually it occurs to me this concept that Pam has introduced to the panel about not being so much a public good as a private good. Are the trends in K through 12 contributing to this differentiation between a public good and a private good, even at a level that is ostensibly public, in terms of quality of education at that level?
That's an excellent question, and I don't know that I have the answer that really is definitive from my perspective in that regard. I don't know. I think that certainly the trends in K through 12 are the trends in large measure of what we value and where we put our emphasis. Whether that's funding, whether that's families, whether that is communities, whether that is the expectations of our systems. They are related. It is all related. And in that sense, it's related to where we are in higher education. But to the extent that we see education, period, as a public good, P through whatever, then in fact we have a different view on what our collective responsibility is. If there were one thing that I would change in general, and that is not financially related in all education, is more of an attitude about what is possible than simply checking the boxes in systems. You know, we're going to do X number of years here, Y here, and then I'm going to have a degree, I'm going to get a job, versus thinking about education, period, as life, where it includes a job, for sure, I hope, but it includes citizenship, it includes relationships, it includes social contributions, and I think we have somehow made it more of a commodity than a part of developing our lives.
Let me address a little bit of that as well. We fully recognize that if we are out recruiting a young man or young woman to come to the academy, and they're in their junior or senior year of high school, and we realize that they didn't get the proper education in grade school and middle school, it's too late. And we recognize that. We've done a lot of things, and we get our cadets out to try to influence K through 12 educators to encourage, to inspire their kids to get with it sooner. The opportunities are there. Oftentimes, they just don't take advantage of them. We hold what we call a STEM boot camp at the academy. And it's a regional, a Colorado thing, where we go into K through 12 and bring teachers into the academy and expose them to cadets and expose them to our STEM programs and give them ideas to take them back and get them, initiate them in their own systems. But it's a problem. You have to address it for sure, and the sooner you address it, the better.
Madam Economist?
I would agree with you that the problem of increasing higher ed, the percentages of our population that goes on to higher ed and completes, and dealing with this competitiveness issue for our country, and as well as the income inequality issue, is fundamentally partly about K through 12 education. And even before that, pre-K, it starts very early, I agree. And the other part is access. And those are the two things I think we have to figure out in the years to come. How do we deal with that so that students are graduating from high school ready to go to college? And then how do we make good on the promise to them that they can afford to get there when they make that happen? That second part of the problem, I think, is solvable. It's complicated, but I think it's solvable, and I think there are people at this table think a lot about how we improve access. That K through 12 problem and that pre-K problem, those are really complicated problems that people think a lot about, and some of it's about the system and some of it's about the society. But I do think that the problem, I think Pam's comment that she mentioned, commodification of education is probably the big answer to the question about why we've moved away from the notion of education as a public good and turned it into a private one. I think most people right now, when you look at the polls nationally about what people should cut in every state, not just Colorado when budgets get tight, people immediately talk about higher education. It's the first thing on the block. And they often, I think that has happened because people believe that the returns to education are for the now, just for the individual, and that it's a commodity and that's not an investment of our country in our future like we used to believe in education. And I think we've forgotten about those citizenship issues and the fact that bringing more people here and getting them great jobs means there has a ripple effect on the rest of the economy because they start businesses and hire people, and that ripples through. And so I think that's the answer to the question about why we've moved in that direction. But I would think we would need not only an evening but maybe a whole weekend to talk about the K through 12 issues that you correctly, I think, brought up about being the elephant in the room.
Well, I couldn't agree more that the K through 12 issues are really a precursor to some of the problems. People not as well prepared as they need to be successful in college, but beyond that, to be successful in life in the field that they want to choose. I once sat next to a mathematics professor who would turn to me every now and then and say, I wish they'd taught them math instead of feeling good about their bad math. It was a bit of a curmudgeon, but it really sort of cemented it for me anyway. So,
Whitney, do you have a question? Whitney, just to clarify, you're talking about whether the capability of going to college.
I am talking about the capability of any child to be a kindergartner, a first grader, a fifth grader, a junior high, a high school, or a college.
All right. The question to the panel is, and I'll maybe frame it a little bit differently. Do we have an issue with students who are incapable of being, or children who are incapable of being students? Is there such a thing? Would you agree that there is such a thing? And how would you see that from your lens as a college leader? Jill, can I start with you?
Wow. That's, you were, you know, I agree with you. It's a big problem. There are kids who don't make it through high school, certainly, that aren't capable of being students. There are students, and we know there are times when those problems are ignored and students continue to go through the system without addressing those issues. We certainly, at Colorado College, our students are, as the General had mentioned, our students come to us very academically prepared to do the work, and also supported by, often, the majority of our students supported by their families throughout the system. That said, we do have, I think most of us would agree, the students that come to our institutions and then fail because usually it has nothing to do with academics. It has something to do with all those other things that touch us, problems at home, emotional problems, psychological problems. And I think that reflection of what we see at our level is also true throughout the system. And the reason students come to school because, and there are obviously more complicated things like being hungry at some places as well, but certainly usually students, when they can't be students, it's because of these other things that are complicating their lives and their ability to focus on their academics.
Please join me again in thanking these wonderful leaders for their insights and their candor.